Imagine a fleet of warships so massive it blotted out the stars. 300 of them, a monument to terror from the Galactic Hegemony Council, parked right on the edge of human space. Every single ship was bigger than anything humanity had ever dreamed of building. And these weren't just war machines. They were designed to crush your spirit before a single laser was ever fired. Grand Admiral Zixth, from the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watched the display with his 4 eyes, filled with satisfaction. It was all going according to a playbook that hadn't failed in 50,000 years. It was a simple plan. Show up with overwhelming force, flash your highlight reel of past conquests, and watch the new guys crumble. The hulls of the hegemony ships were a chilling mosaic of bones and skulls from species they'd wiped out. Gigantic banners, stitched together from the flags of conquered worlds, fluttered between the massive weapon arrays. And from every ship, a broadcast of pure horror. The recorded final screams and desperate pleas for mercy from hundreds of civilizations that were now just a memory. It was psychological warfare turned into an art form. The human diplomatic vessel is approaching, his second-in-command reported. He was a thin Vexillonian whose skin rippled with colors based on his mood. Right now, it was the confident purple of a sure win. Zixth savored the moment. The humans were just kids on the galactic stage. They'd barely been traveling in space for 200 years. They had a tiny little bubble of about 30 systems, with modest colonies and a few trade routes. Their tech was cute, but nothing special. Their military was basically a neighborhood watch with patrol ships and defense platforms, nothing that could even scratch the paint on a single hegemony dreadnought. The human ship that approached was a gnat next to the armada. It looked like a tiny guppy swimming toward a school of great white sharks. The vessel was clean, functional, no scary decorations, no intimidating light shows. It was just there. Plain, almost boring in its efficiency. "Open a channel," Zixth commanded. "Let's begin the ritual of submission." The main view screen flickered, showing the inside of the human ship. A man stood there in a simple military uniform. He had dark hair and calm eyes that just seemed to observe everything without a hint of emotion. Intel said his name was Captain Park Minjun, some mid-level diplomat and officer. "Captain Park," Zixth began, his voice booming with the kind of deep authority that usually made knees buckle. "You stand before the collected might of the Galactic Hegemony Council. We represent 4,000 species and control 70,000 worlds. Now, watch what happens to those who refuse to join us." With a wave of his hand, Zixth fired up the holograms. Massive 3D recordings flared to life in the void between the ships, showing world after world falling to the hegemony. Cities burned, people ran, leaders knelt in surrender. The videos were a greatest hits collection of despair, chosen for maximum psychological damage. They showed parents begging for their children's lives. They showed proud warrior races dropping their weapons, their spirits broken. They showed that exact moment when hope dies in someone's eyes. Zixth watched Captain Park's face, waiting. This was the moment they always broke. Their hands would start to shake, a sweat would break out on their brow, their bodies would betray their terror. Some would weep, others would try to hold on to their dignity while their bodies screamed in fear. But all of them, every single one, understood that fighting back was pointless. But Captain Park's reaction was weird. His lips were pressed together in a tight line, like he was trying to hold something back. His shoulders were shaking, just a little. Was this how humans showed fear? The intel reports were a bit fuzzy on their stress reactions. "You see before you the price of defiance," Zixth continued, getting into his groove. He'd given this speech hundreds of times. "The hegemony offers you a choice. Submit peacefully. Accept our guidance, and your species can live. Refuse, and you'll join the dust of history. Your worlds will become a warning to the next upstarts who think about resisting." Captain Park brought a hand up to his mouth and coughed. His face was getting red. Yes, Zix thought, This has to be fear. The human was trying to look composed, but his body was betraying him. We have crushed species with technology far beyond your own, Zixth pushed, driving the point home. We have shattered empires that ruled for 10,000 years before your ancestors even discovered fire. We have turned homeworlds into dead rocks that serve as nothing more than warning beacons. He had the recording zoom in on the skulls decorating his fleet. Each one was a trophy from a species that had said no. They were preserved and mounted as a permanent reminder of what defiance costs. The camera focused on a few specific skulls, showing the incredible variety of life the hegemony had snuffed out. Captain Park's shoulders were definitely shaking now. He looked like he was having trouble catching his breath. His face was beet red, and his eyes were watering. I must, Park said, his voice strained. I must request a recess to consult with Earth. This is a significant decision. It requires input from my government. Perfect, Zixth thought. The human could barely speak. He was so terrified. He was just trying to buy time, clinging to the hopeless fantasy that his leaders could find a way out. They never did. You have 12 of your Earth hours, Zixth declared, feeling generous. We will wait for your response. Observe our fleet well, Captain Park. Count our ships, study our weapons, and understand that this is just a fraction of our true power. Then come back with your answer. The channel closed. Captain Park's face vanished from the screen. Zixth turned to his officers, beaming with satisfaction. Another species learns its place in the galaxy. Begin the next phase. I want every ship to power up its full intimidation arrays. I want the humans to see death in every direction they look. When their captain returns, he will bring us their unconditional surrender. The bridge crew got to work, a well-oiled machine of conquest. Across the Armada, more weapons glowed to life. More recordings of dying civilizations screamed into the void. More ships shifted, forming an inescapable cage of steel and fury. What Zixth didn't know, and couldn't possibly comprehend, was that on board the human ship, Captain Park Minjin had finally let go. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was laughing. He was laughing so hard that tears were streaming down his face. Every time he looked at the recordings his crew had made of the hegemony's terrifying fleet, he would just lose it all over again. And all around him, the rest of his crew was doing the same. Sir, said Lieutenant Chen, wiping tears from her own eyes, we have to send our report to Earth Command, but I can't stop watching this. Did you see the skeletons on the hulls? It looks like they got them from a discount Halloween store. Park nodded, taking a deep, ragged breath to try and calm down. I know, but we have to be professional. They're clearly serious, even if they look completely ridiculous to us. He opened a secure channel to Earth. In moments, the faces of top military brass and government leaders popped onto his screen. Park gave his report as straight-faced as he could, describing the fleet, their threats, and their whole intimidation song and dance. When he finished, there was a long, stunned silence. Then, someone on the Earth side of the call started to snicker. A second later, the entire command center on Earth erupted in roaring laughter. I'm sorry, Captain Park, Admiral Kim said, trying to get a hold of herself. But did they really think skulls would scare us? Do they have any idea about human culture? Apparently not, Admiral, Park replied. They seemed incredibly proud of their display. I genuinely think this stuff works on other species. Of course it does, said a new voice. It was Dr. Sarah Martinez, the top xenopsychologist. Most species that make it to space do it through cooperation and unity. They tend to be more cautious, more community-focused. The idea of death, especially violent death, is profoundly terrifying to them, she continued, pulling up some data. Humans, we're the oddballs. We're one of the only apex predators to ever achieve spaceflight. We evolved hunting and being hunted. Death is an old friend. We've spent our entire history writing stories about it, making art about it, and yes, even turning it into entertainment. So their big, scary show hits our cultural blind spot, Park said, the pieces clicking into place. Worse than that, Martinez corrected. It lands squarely in what we find funny. This whole over-the-top, trying to be scary thing. We invented entire industries around it. Horror movies, Halloween, haunted houses, ghost stories around the campfire. We actively pay money to feel a little bit scared, just for fun. Back on Earth, more human vessels were scrambling to rendezvous with Captain Park's ship. But this wasn't some mighty military armada. It was a standard diplomatic fleet, meant for observation and first contact. No one really thought the aliens, the hegemony, would actually attack. If they wanted to wipe humanity out, they would have done it already instead of putting on this over-the-top spooky light show. As the human ships popped into existence at the border, crew members glued their faces to the windows, snapping pictures of the alien fleet. The images went viral across human networks in seconds. Aboard his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Grand Admiral Zixth was getting more confused by the minute. His intel officers were monitoring human communications, and nothing they intercepted made any sense. "Admiral," his specialist reported, her voice shaky with uncertainty, "the humans, they're broadcasting on open channels. It's not encrypted military traffic. It looks like social media." "Put it on screen," Zixth commanded. The main view screen lit up with a flood of human messages. Zixth stared, dumbfounded, as human sailors shared pictures of his terrifying war fleet with captions like, "You guys, this is the most amazing haunted house I've ever seen," and "These aliens take Halloween way more seriously than we do." People were comparing his ships to theme park rides and saying they were trying too hard to be edgy. One post, which was getting a lot of likes, was a close-up of the menacing skull design on a hegemony dreadnought. The human text over it read, "This is what happens when you order your galaxy-conquering armada from a party supply store." "What? Is Halloween?" Zixth demanded, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. His xenocultural advisor, a scholar who had studied countless species, frantically searched for an answer. What he discovered only made things worse. "Admiral, Halloween is a human holiday. They dress up in scary costumes and decorate their homes with symbols of death. For fun. It seems to be an activity primarily for their children." A feeling washed over Zixth that he hadn't felt in his long, decorated career. Pure, unadulterated confusion. They have their children? Celebrate death as a game? "It appears so, Admiral. They also have these things called haunted houses, where they pay money for other humans to jump out and scare them in a controlled setting. They find this entertaining." Another officer chimed in. "Sir, we're getting a hail from Captain Park. He says he's ready to deliver humanity's official response." Zixth straightened up, trying to shake off the weird feeling. It had to be a bluff, a coping mechanism. Some species used humor to mask their terror. Yes, that had to be it. "Patch him through," he ordered. Captain Park's face appeared on the screen again, looking much more composed this time. He was professional, diplomatic, but Zixth could still see a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Grand Admiral Zixth," Park began formally, "I have spoken with my superiors on Earth, and we have prepared humanity's answer to your ultimatum. But before I deliver it, we were hoping you could clarify a cultural point for us." "Go on," Zixth said, his patience wearing thin. "Your fleet's design is incredibly detailed. It clearly took a lot of work. We just want to be sure we're interpreting your intentions correctly. Is all of this," Park gestured vaguely, "meant to be scary?" The question was so out of left field that Zixth was speechless for a moment. "Of course it's meant to be scary. It represents the fate of all who defy the hegemony." Park nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Okay, Grand Admiral, I think we have a bit of a cultural misunderstanding here. Humans, well, we have a very different reaction to scary imagery and intimidation tactics than you might be used to." He signaled, and new images filled the screen. It was pictures of human children in skeleton pajamas, holding bags overflowing with candy. There were photos of suburban homes decked out with fake graveyards and smiling ghosts. Then, videos of people screaming with laughter as they ran through dark hallways, while actors in monster costumes chased them. "This," Park explained gently, "is Halloween. It's one of our biggest holidays. We use skulls and skeletons as party decorations. We go out of our way to find things that will scare us. because we think it's fun when we know it isn't a real danger. More images flashed by, posters for horror movies called Alien Invasion and Space Monsters, book covers with terrifying creatures, and ads for theme parks with giant, elaborate monster displays. We have entire billion-dollar industries built around creating scary things for entertainment, Park went on. For us, when something tries too hard to look scary, our brain doesn't register fear. It registers a familiar pattern, tells us it's not a real threat, and the result is usually, well, amusement. Zixth stared, his mind refusing to compute what he was hearing. Are you saying that our fleet, perfected over 50,000 years of conquest, looks like a form of entertainment to you? Park's expression softened with sympathy. I'm saying it hits a cultural blind spot for us, Admiral. We see what you were going for. But because we see you trying so hard to be scary, it tells us that you're not actually dangerous. Truly dangerous things don't need to dress up. They just act. All around the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Zixth's officers just stared at each other, completely lost. Their ultimate weapon, the psychological protocol that had forced hundreds of worlds to their knees without a single shot, was completely useless. It was a joke to these bizarre apes who had somehow turned fear itself into a hobby. Something snapped inside Grand Admiral Zixth. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was pure, hot fury, mixed with a deep, burning humiliation. Enough! His voice boomed across the bridge. If they do not fear our symbols, they will fear our power. Bring all weapon systems online. We will show them what a real threat looks like. Across the hegemony fleet, weapons of unimaginable power were unleashed. Planet-cracking siege cannons emerged from their hidden ports. Antimatter torpedo bays hissed open, revealing warheads that could incinerate entire star systems. Quantum destabilizers, weapons that could rip holes in the very fabric of reality, began to whine as they charged. "Target the nearest moon!" Zixth roared. "Let's see if the humans find this amusing." The entire fleet fired as one. The moon, which had been floating peacefully for billions of years, simply vanished. The siege cannons pulverized it into a cloud of dust. The antimatter warheads vaporized the dust. The quantum destabilizers erased what was left, leaving nothing but empty space where a world used to be. "Again!" Zixth bellowed. "Target the asteroid belt!" A series of terrifying demonstrations followed, each one showcasing a different facet of the hegemony's overwhelming military might. It was a display of force so absolute that any other species in the galaxy would have been begging for mercy. On the human ships, however, a very different conversation was happening. The reaction was not what Zixth expected. "Whoa, did you guys see the containment field on that antimatter torpedo?" An engineer shouted over an open channel. "That magnetic bottle is way more efficient than our current design." "Forget that. Get a lock on the quantum destabilizer," another voice shot back, buzzing with excitement. "They're using a cascade effect to tear dimensional layers. I have to get this data to the labs back home." "Don't worry, I'm recording everything," a third voice confirmed calmly. "This is the best weapons test our military has ever seen, and we didn't even have to pay for it. We're getting perfect operational specs on their entire arsenal." Zixth listened to the intercepts, his jaw hanging open. They weren't scared. They were thrilled. They were treating his doomsday weapons like a technical lecture, taking notes with the focused curiosity of graduate students. "Explain this," he snarled at his xenocultural advisor. The poor scholar was sweating as he sifted through data. "Admiral, it seems humans have a cultural obsession with something they call reverse engineering. Their entire technological history is built on seeing a complex system and immediately trying to take it apart to see how it works." "All species do that," Zixth snapped. "Yes, Admiral, but humans, they see it as a puzzle, a challenge. Advanced technology doesn't make them feel inferior. It makes them excited to figure it out and build a better one. Their first faster-than-light engine was built because they studied a natural anomaly and worked backward from there." Just then, Another officer approached, looking pale. "Sir, we're receiving formal requests from 3 different human science stations. They're asking if we have any unexploded ordnance they could have for academic purposes. They want to study our weapons, Admiral. They're asking for samples." It was supposed to be terrifying, a grand display of force that had humbled 1,000 civilizations. So why was Grand Admiral Zixth getting tech support requests? One message blinked on his screen, reading, and I quote, "The antimatter containment system you demonstrated would solve several problems our engineering corps has been working on. Would it be possible to examine an intact example?" Before he could respond, Captain Park's face popped up again, looking almost sheepish. "Grand Admiral," he said, "my apologies for the enthusiasm of our science teams. Your weapons show was technically impressive, but I've been asked to explain a little something about human psychology that might clear things up." Zixth just stared, completely baffled. This human had somehow turned his ultimate threat into a university lecture. "See, xenobiologists classify humans as persistence predators," Park began, like a friendly professor. "We evolved on a planet that was actively, and I mean actively, trying to kill us. We have weather that can flatten cities, wildlife that can hunt us, and diseases that change faster than we can find cures. Our world has disasters that literally redraw the maps." Images flickered onto the screen. Earth, giant hurricanes that could peel a city like an orange, volcanoes blotting out the sun, the ground itself ripping apart, and floods swallowing whole countries. It was a brutal, violent place. "To survive that," Park said, "we developed a very specific mindset. We don't see obstacles as stop signs. We see them as puzzles to be solved. When we see something huge and dangerous, our first instinct isn't to run," he continued. "It's to figure out how it works, take it apart, and learn how to beat it." More images flashed by, showing human history, people climbing the highest, most treacherous mountains just to say they did. People diving to the bottom of the deepest oceans just to see what was there. People strapping themselves to rockets and shooting for the moon long before they knew it was safe, just to find out what would happen. "We also got really good at knowing what a real threat looks like," Park added. "Things that are all for show, making a lot of noise. They don't really scare us. On Earth, the things that can actually hurt you don't waste time trying to look scary. A lion doesn't roar before it pounces. A tsunami doesn't send a warning shot," Park finished. "Real danger just acts." A cold knot formed in Zixth's stomach. "You're saying our demonstrations prove we aren't a real threat?" he asked slowly. "I'm saying," Park replied, choosing his words with care, "that your demonstrations prove you'd rather not have a real fight. Species that actually want to destroy someone don't show off their guns first, they just start shooting." He explained, "Your big, fancy show tells us that you think a real battle would be costly, even for you." Zixth's Peltherin advisor began nodding. "He's right, Admiral. Our entire strategy is built to get them to surrender because actual war is expensive and unpredictable. We've just never met anyone who could read us so clearly," the advisor admitted. "And another thing," Park went on, "humans have been the top predator on our planet for hundreds of thousands of years. We're used to being the most dangerous thing in the room. So, when we see a big show of power, it doesn't trigger fear. It triggers our curiosity and our planners." A new human transmission was suddenly intercepted. It was from a military strategy session. Human officers were calmly discussing how to fight Zixth's fleet. They weren't talking about how to survive or run away. They were talking about how to win. "Their siege cannons have a charge time of about 40 seconds, based on the energy readings," one human analyst said. "That gives us plenty of time to get in close and hit their weapon systems directly." Another voice chimed in. "The antimatter torpedoes are strong, but they're slow. Our point defense guns should be able to pick most of them off if we keep our distance. The quantum destabilizers are the real problem," a third voice said, "but it looks like they need a bunch of ships firing at once to work. If we can break up their formation, we can make them basically useless." Zixth felt a wave of horror. The humans weren't scared of his power. They were reverse engineering it, looking for weak spots. While his fleet was posturing, the humans were calmly preparing for battle like seasoned veterans. "Captain Park," Zix said, his voice barely a whisper, "are you telling me that nothing we've shown you has frightened you?" Park gave it a moment of thought. "Your tech is amazing, Grand Admiral. Your weapons are powerful, and you have a very big fleet. But no, we're not afraid. If you really wanted to destroy us, you would have done it by now. Instead, you're talking. And that means you want something from us, which gives us room to negotiate." The call ended. Zixth stood on his bridge, a 50,000-year-old strategy of intimidation utterly shattered by a species that had barely left its own solar system. He was facing a choice he'd never had to make: actually start a war with someone who refused to be scared. It would be messy, expensive, and if word got out that bullying didn't work, other species might start getting brave. But before he could issue a single order, every alarm on every ship in both fleets began screaming at once. "Admiral!" his sensor officer yelled, all four of his arms flying across the controls. "Dark space rupture! We've got multiple signatures coming in at the edge of the system!" On the main screen, space itself looked like it was being torn open, and through these wounds in reality, something ancient and truly terrifying was crawling out. Zixth's blood ran cold. He knew those signatures. "Zilth," he whispered. They were the boogeyman of the galaxy. The Zilth weren't conquerors. They were a plague, a cosmic harvest that swept through the galaxy every few centuries. Their ships weren't built, they were grown, horrific, living monsters that fed on life itself. They didn't talk, they didn't threaten, they just ate. They would strip entire sectors of space, leaving behind nothing but dead worlds. The Zilth fleet was smaller than the hegemonies, but that didn't matter in the slightest. Their ships were twisted, pulsating masses of organic tissue. There was no art to them, no posturing, no intimidation displays. They were pure, deadly function. "All ships, defensive formation," Zixth commanded, his voice tight with a fear that was very, very real. "Prepare to retreat." Across his fleet, discipline broke. This wasn't a species to be bullied. This was the predator that even the predators ran from. But on the human ships, the reaction was completely different. Captain Park's voice cut across the comms, no longer friendly or academic, but sharp and commanding. "All human vessels, combat formation Delta, weapons to full power. I want tactical data on those hostiles, now!" Zixth stared in total shock as the small human fleet, instead of running, tightened their formation and moved forward. They positioned themselves directly between the oncoming Zilth and Zixth's panicking fleet. "Captain Park," Zixth transmitted desperately, "you have no idea what you're doing. You can't fight them. You can't reason with them. Your only hope is to run." Park's face appeared on the screen, and the sight of it chilled Zixth more than the Zilth ships had. The friendly professor was gone. In his place was a man with eyes of cold, hard steel, utterly devoid of fear. "We know exactly what they are, Admiral," Park said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We've met them before. 3 years ago, a scout party tried to harvest one of our outer colonies." He paused. "We killed them all." "That's impossible," Zixth stammered. "No one fights the Zilth and wins." "We aren't no one," Park shot back. "To all hegemony ships, we're sending you our tactical data now. Their organic hulls are tough against energy weapons, but they're weak against kinetic strikes. The regeneration cores are located here, here, and here," Park instructed, as a flood of targeting solutions filled the hegemony's networks. "If you want to live through this, you follow our lead." The Zilth fleet surged forward, a silent, sickening wave of hunger. They didn't care if a ship was human or hegemony. To them, it was all just food. "Admiral," his tactical officer said, his voice filled with awe, "the human ships. They're moving to intercept. They're shielding us." Zixth was completely baffled by what he was witnessing. The species they were here to strong-arm into submission, the ones they considered nothing more than prey, were actively moving to shield his own fleet. It flew in the face of everything he knew about how the galaxy worked. The Zilth shot first. Huge streams of bioplasma capable of melting right through standard shields lashed out at the human ships. The humans didn't even bother to evade. Their shields flared brilliantly, absorbing the hits, and they fired back instantly. Human weapons were nothing like the hegemony's technology. While the hegemony relied on elegant energy beams and fancy exotic matter warheads, human weapons were brutally straightforward. They used mass accelerators that launched projectiles at relativistic speeds, missiles packed with overwhelming kinetic force, and focused charges designed to shatter a target, not just vaporize it. The first Zilth ship to take a direct hit from one of these human railguns didn't just explode. It cracked apart. Its biological hull, engineered to regenerate from energy attacks, had no way to recover from the sheer physical trauma of having a massive slug tear through its entire frame. "They know how to fight them," Zixth's tactical officer said, his voice filled with awe. "The humans actually know how to kill the Zilth." Then, a voice cut through on an open channel, broadcast to every ship in both fleets. It was Captain Park, his tone sharp and professional, the voice of a man who had been in this exact situation before. "Human fleet, execute pattern Gamma. Hegemony ships, if you're going to join the fight, concentrate your fire on targets we've already cracked open. Don't waste your energy trying to punch new holes. Aim for the organic seams we're creating." One of Zixth's junior officers glanced at him, his eyes filled with a desperate kind of hope. "Admiral, your orders?" In that moment, Zixth made a call that would have been unimaginable just an hour before. "All ships, you will follow the humans' tactical commands. Focus your fire as they instruct. We fight together, or we die together." The hegemony fleet began to move, taking up positions alongside the human vessels. It was a clumsy, improvised dance between two militaries that had never even trained together, trying to find a rhythm in the middle of a chaotic battle. But the humans were incredibly quick to adapt, tweaking their own strategies to make the most of the hegemony's capabilities. A hulking Zilth harvester ship zeroed in on a hegemony dreadnought, its slimy biological tendrils reaching out to start digesting the ship. Before it could even touch the hull, 3 human ships swarmed it, their weapons ripping into the organic vessel with cold, calculated brutality. "Hegemony Dreadnought Valor's call. Fall back and get your shields recharged," Park transmitted. "We've got this one." Zixth could only watch as the humans fought with a ferocity he had never encountered. They weren't fighting to win with grace or efficiency. They were fighting simply to kill. Their ships absorbed damage that would have sent any other species running for their lives, but they just kept on fighting. When their shields gave out, they kept shooting. When their hulls were ripped open, they rerouted power and pressed the attack. He saw one human ship, its entire port side a mess of molten metal from bioplasma fire, deliberately steer itself into a Zilth harvester. The resulting explosion destroyed them both, but it broke the Zilth formation just long enough for other human ships to surge into the gap. "Captain Park's ship is taking heavy fire," a hegemony officer shouted. "Their shields are down to 15%. Zixth glanced at his tactical display. Park's ship, the very diplomatic vessel that had started this whole mess, was holding the most dangerous position in the entire battle. It was intentionally drawing fire from multiple Zilth cruisers to give a damaged hegemony ship a chance to escape. "All ships within range," Zixth commanded, his voice booming across the bridge. "Focus all fire on the Zilth ships targeting Captain Park, now!" The hegemony fleet responded as one. Dozens of warships unleashed everything they had on the vessels threatening the human captain. A storm of energy beams and matter torpedoes slammed into targets already wounded by human kinetic strikes. The combined firepower was absolutely devastating. The Zilth, suddenly facing a united and unexpectedly fierce resistance and losing ships faster than they could harvest resources, began to fall back. Their grotesque biological ships retreated toward the dark space ruptures they had come from, vanishing to seek out easier targets elsewhere. As the final Zilth ship slipped back into dark space, a deep, exhausted silence settled over the two fleets. The human ships were battered, some completely destroyed, but they had held the line. More than that, they had protected the very fleet that had come to bully them. Sixth opened a private channel to Captain Park. The human's face appeared on the screen. His uniform was torn, and his face was smudged with soot from fires on his own ship. Behind him, the bridge was a wreck of sparking consoles and exposed wires. "Captain Park," Sixth said carefully, "you put your own ships in harm's way to protect us. Why?" Park looked bone-tired, but his gaze was unwavering. "Because the Zilth were the real enemy, Admiral. You're just trying to expand your territory. That's just politics. The Zilth wipe out entire civilizations. That's genocide. We know the difference. Your species fights with a brutality we did not anticipate," Sixth admitted. "You saw us laugh at your little show of force and assumed we weren't dangerous," Park replied. "But humans figured out a long, long time ago that the things trying to look scary usually aren't the real threat. The Zilth don't bother with shows or warnings or mind games. They just attack. That's what real danger looks like, and that's when we stop laughing." While human ships began field repairs, the hegemony vessels just hung in space, unsure of what to do. The intimidation mission was a catastrophic failure, but in its place, something far more valuable had been forged. Respect, earned in the heat of battle. Grand Admiral Sixth sat in his command chair, watching the battle recordings for the third time. What he was seeing turned everything he thought he knew about war and about humans completely upside down. The humans hadn't just fought well. They had fought with a savage determination that went far beyond what was necessary. When their shields collapsed, they kept on fighting. When their ships were crippled, they used those crippled ships as weapons. When the odds seemed impossible, they simply adapted and drove forward. But it wasn't some mindless rage. Every single move was calculated. Every sacrifice had a clear purpose. The humans fought like they had been doing this for a very long time, against enemies far, far worse than his intimidation fleet. "Admiral," his xenocultural advisor interrupted quietly, "I've finished a deeper analysis of human military history. I think you need to see this." The scholar brought up data that painted an absolutely terrifying picture of humanity. Their entire evolutionary history was one long, unbroken war. Not just against other species, but against their own planet, against each other, against anything that stood in their way. Humans have been at war for their entire recorded history, the advisor explained. Not the occasional conflict like most races. We're talking constant, unending warfare. They fought each other, their climate, diseases, predators, and now, us. For them, war isn't an exception. It's their normal state. Sixth watched footage from human history, empires rising and falling, technologies designed for the sole purpose of killing more efficiently, entire philosophies built around the idea of organized violence. Even their stories and their art were saturated with conflict. But here's the truly terrifying part, the advisor continued. They also cooperate. Humans are, at the same time, fiercely competitive and intensely cooperative. They can be at each other's throats 1 minute and then unite instantly to face an outside threat. They have these things called armies, massive organizations dedicated entirely to coordinated violence. Most species that achieve spaceflight have evolved beyond such primitive concepts, Sixth said. Exactly. Most species learn to cooperate first and then develop technology. Humans develop technology to make their wars deadlier and then use that power to get to space. They're an apex predator species that simply never stop being predators, even after they got smart. Captain Park's face suddenly appeared on the main screen, cutting the analysis short. He looked a little cleaner now. His uniform was fresh and the soot was gone, but his expression was just as serious. "Grand Admiral, we should probably talk about what happens now." Sixth sat up straighter in his chair. "I agree. The original reason for my visit has been complicated." "That's one way of putting it," Park said, a tiny smile playing on his lips but not reaching his eyes. "You came here to scare us into joining your empire. We laughed at you, and then we saved your lives. I'm guessing this isn't standard procedure for you." "It is not," Sixth confessed. "To be perfectly honest, Captain Park, I have no idea what to do. My mission is a failure, but I can't just turn around and leave. The Hegemony Council will demand results. Park nodded slowly. Then let me help you understand something about my people that your files clearly missed. We laughed at your big, scary fleet not because we thought you were weak. We laughed because your methods just don't work on our psychology. I'm beginning to understand that, Zixth said. But you don't understand why, Park pressed on. Humans spent hundreds of thousands of years as hunters on a planet that was trying to kill us every single day. We got very, very good at telling the difference between a performance threat and a real one. Real predators don't roar before they strike, Admiral. Real danger doesn't announce itself with a big light show. Your arrival told us you weren't an immediate threat, so it let us relax. And the Zilth? Zixth asked. Park's face hardened. The Zilth are a real threat. They don't talk. They don't posture. They just consume. When their scouts found one of our colonies 3 years ago, they attacked without any warning. They killed 80,000 of my people before we could even mount a defense. We had to learn to fight them, because there was no other option, Park said, his face hardening. We followed their scouts back to their base and wiped it out. We chased down every single Zilth ship in the sector and eliminated them. We didn't do it because we wanted to, but because we knew if any got away, they'd come back to hunt more of our people. That kind of violence against the Zilth is unheard of, Zixth murmured. Is it? Or have most species just never been the apex predator in their own backyard? Park leaned in. Admiral, let me explain what a human is. We're persistence predators. We evolved to run our prey into the ground until it literally died of exhaustion. We're pack hunters who figured out how to use complex, coordinated tactics. We're tool makers who had invented weapons long before we even figured out farming. But more than anything, we are survivors who have clawed our way through one near-extinction event after another and just kept going. He pointed to the battered human ships on the main screen. You just watched us take on the Zilth. That's what it looks like when we stop being amused and get serious. We don't fight to be flashy. We don't fight for glory. We fight to win, and we don't stop fighting until we've won or until we're all dead. A shiver went down Zixth's spine. You're saying your entire species is just naturally violent? Not at all, Park stated firmly. I'm saying we're naturally survivors. Violence is just a tool we pick up when we have to, but you need to understand this about us. We would always rather work together than fight. We'd rather build things than tear them down. We will always choose peace if it's on the table. But, Zigthara prompted, sensing the unspoken part. But when peace isn't an option, when we're threatened or when people we've promised to protect are in danger, we are very, very good at violence, because as a species, we've been practicing it for our entire history. Park rose to his feet, his posture shifting to something more official. So, Grand Admiral, here is humanity's official response to your ultimatum. We will not bow to the hegemony. We refuse to accept your authority over our worlds. However, we are more than willing to open up diplomatic channels, sign trade agreements, and form a mutual defense pact. What happened today proves we can be effective allies when it counts. The Council will never agree to that, Zixth said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. The Council will agree to whatever you report to them, Park countered. You're the Grand Admiral. You have the power to negotiate, and I think, if you're being honest with yourself, you realize that trying to conquer humanity by force would cost you far more than you'd ever gain by making us your allies. Zixth mulled this over. He replayed the battle in his mind, recalling how the human ships had moved to shield hegemony vessels, even after being threatened with total annihilation. He thought about the chillingly methodical way they dismantled the Zilth forces, and the unsettling thought that if humans ever turned that same focus on the hegemony, it would be a catastrophic war for everyone. What you're suggesting has never been done, he said at last. No species has ever said no to the hegemony and been allowed to stay independent. Then we'll be the first, Park said with a simple shrug. Admiral, you arrived here with a fleet designed to scare us. You put on a power display meant to make us tremble. But humans don't fear power. We respect capability, and that has to be proven with actions, not just threats. And we proved our capability today. Zixth said slowly, as understanding dawned on him. Yes, you did. You fought remarkably well with us. Your ships, while clearly designed more for intimidation than pure function, were still useful when used correctly. Your people adapted to a tactical crisis they weren't expecting with incredible speed. Your actions have earned our respect." Park smiled, and for the first time, it was a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "See, that's the difference. Respect builds cooperation. Fear only builds resentment, and sooner or later, rebellion. You can't hold an empire of thousands of worlds together just by scaring everyone. Eventually, someone is going to push back, and if your scare tactics fail, you've got no other plan. You want us to fundamentally change our strategy for expansion." Zixt said, "What I'm suggesting is that you already have, at least where we're concerned. We won't be your subjects, but we will be your partners. We'll share our tech, coordinate our defenses, open trade routes, and help you protect your space from threats like the Zilth. But we do it as equals." Zixt made a choice then and there, one that would likely get him fired but could potentially save billions of lives. "I will pitch your proposal to the Council as a new path forward for the hegemony. Species that prove they can contribute to our collective defense will be offered a partnership instead of being forced into submission." "They might say no," Park cautioned. "They might, but today taught me something critical. Humanity won't be the last species that isn't impressed by your intimidation tactics. Your psychology is strange, but it can't be one of a kind. Eventually, the hegemony is going to run into another species that doesn't react to fear the way we expect. It's better to have a diplomatic option ready before we accidentally start a war we can't win." "That's a wise perspective, Admiral," Park acknowledged. As Zixt was about to sign off, his communications officer cut in. "Admiral, one of our intel analysts has a nagging question about human culture." "Go ahead." "Sir, he wants to know, if humans think our intimidation displays are funny because they look like they're Halloween decorations, and Halloween is a holiday where they actively look for scary things for fun, does that mean the humans actually enjoyed being threatened?" A very long silence filled the comm channel. Then, echoing from this human flagship, came the very sound that had started this whole bizarre day. Captain Park was laughing again. "Admiral," Park said, catching his breath, "let me be very clear. We weren't laughing because we liked the threat. We were laughing because your threat wasn't threatening. It was like watching someone hide behind a curtain, but their feet are sticking out, and then they jump out yelling, 'Boo!' It's funny because it's trying so hard to be scary and failing so miserably. So if we had just attacked you, without any warning or display," Zixt pressed. Park's laughter died instantly. His face became deadly serious again. "Then we wouldn't have had time to laugh. We would have been too busy fighting you. And that, Admiral, is my entire point. Things that are truly dangerous don't need to announce how dangerous they are. They just act." The human ships began to pull away, setting a course back to their own territory. The hegemony fleet just sat there and watched them leave, no longer sure if they had just met the harmless prey they came to conquer or the apex predator they should have been trying to befriend from the very beginning. On the bridge of the flagship, a young officer turned to his commander. "Admiral, what are we going to tell the Council about this?" Zixt watched the human vessels vanish into hyperspace, thinking about a species that made a game out of fear, that fought with terrifying precision, and that was somehow both hilarious and horrifying at the same time. "We're going to tell them the truth," he said finally. "We found a species that is immune to intimidation. We tried to scare them. They laughed at us. Then we fought a common enemy together, and they turned out to be the most skilled warriors we've ever seen. We will also report that humanity has refused to join the hegemony but has offered an alliance between equals. And if the Council ignores all that and orders us to attack them anyway?" the officer asked in a low voice. Zixt thought of the human ships shielding his own. He thought of their cold, calculated combat style. He thought of Captain Park's words about fighting until you win or you die. "Then we will inform the Council that such a war would be long, bloody, and unwinnable, because humans do not surrender. They can't be intimidated, and they seem to view warfare as just another puzzle to be solved. It is far better to have them as our friends than our enemies." As his own ship prepared to jump, Zixth took one last look at the intel files on the human holiday of Halloween. Pictures of little children dressed up as monsters, smiling and having fun. Adults covering their homes in skulls and skeletons as party decorations. And he finally got it. Humans hadn't just conquered their fear. They had domesticated it. They had taken the single most powerful tool of control in the galaxy and turned it into a party game. You can't intimidate a species like that. You can only respect them. And Zixth was quickly learning that respect was a far more powerful currency than fear. Meanwhile, the bridge of the warship Crimson Fang blazed with the light of 1,000 displays. At its center stood Commander Zethor, his arms crossed in grim satisfaction as he watched the last of the Velian colony's defense stations get blown into cosmic dust. Another victory. Another world brought to heel under the mighty Croc Empire. 47 systems now belong to us, his second-in-command reported, his voice thick with pride. The Velian resistance held out for only 6 hours. Zethor clicked his mandibles together, the Croc version of a chuckle. 6 hours was longer than he'd figured. The Velians had guts, if not firepower. But guts don't mean much when you're staring down the barrel of superior technology. For over 3 centuries of conquest, the Croc Empire had learned one simple truth. In this galaxy, power was the only language that got results. Just then, the communication console chirped, signaling a priority message from High Command. Commander Zethor strode over, expecting another routine assignment to crush some weak, upstart civilization. But what he read gave him pause. A new species had just stumbled onto the galactic stage. Designation: humans. They came from the third planet of some yellow star. Their technology was primitive. Basic fusion drives, simple energy weapons, and absolutely no shields detected. The final assessment? No threat. A cakewalk. Zethor opened the attached files. The images that popped up on his screen almost made him laugh. Human ships were clunky, boxy things that looked like they belonged in a museum. The official report guessed their tech was at least 500 years behind Croth standards. "Commander," his weapons officer called out, "new orders from the top." "Let me guess," Zethor sighed. "They want us to go conquer the humans." "Yes, sir. They're calling it a training exercise for the junior officers. The human colonies should be ours in a matter of hours." A training exercise. Zethor couldn't hide his disappointment. He'd been hoping for a real challenge, but an order was an order. Besides, adding another conquered species to his resume wouldn't hurt his career. "Set a course for the closest human colony," he commanded. "What's it called?" "New Edinburgh, Commander. Population of 3 million. Defenses are minimal, just a few orbital platforms. No fleet to speak of." 3 million. Zethor considered this. "We'll give them one chance to surrender. If they refuse, we'll obliterate their orbital defenses and send in the ground troops. Standard procedure." His fleet of 200 warships moved as one, their engines flaring as they jumped into faster-than-light travel. The trip would take 3 days, and Zethor used the time to study everything they knew about these humans. They hailed from a high-gravity world with a single large moon they called Earth. They'd only just figured out how to travel between stars. Their ships were slow, their weapons were crude. The reports showed they'd slapped together 7 colonies in nearby systems, and every single one was barely defended. "They expanded way too fast," his tactical officer noted, looking over the star charts. "Spread themselves thin. It's a classic rookie mistake." "Every young species makes it," Zethor agreed. "They invent the FTL drive and suddenly think the galaxy is theirs for the taking. Then they run into us, and they learn the hard truth. The galaxy belongs to whoever has the strength to hold it." On the 3rd day, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the new Edinburgh system. Zethor immediately ordered a full sensor sweep. The colony was exactly as pathetic as advertised. 1 terraformed planet, a few space stations for trade, and a handful of patrol ships that looked like they'd have trouble with pirates. "Open a channel," Zethor commanded. "Broadcast on all frequencies." The comms officer complied. "Channel is open, Commander." Zethor spoke in the common galactic tongue, certain the humans would have translators. Attention, human colony of New Edinburgh. I am Commander Zethor of the Croth Empire. You have trespassed into our territory. You have one of your hours to surrender unconditionally. Failure to do so will result in the total destruction of your orbital infrastructure and the military occupation of your planet. This is your only warning. He ended the transmission and leaned back, waiting. New species usually reacted in one of three predictable ways. They surrendered instantly, they begged and tried to negotiate, or they foolishly tried to fight. 5 minutes ticked by. Then, a reply came. Commander Zethor, this is Governor Chen of New Edinburgh. The voice was male, human, and surprisingly calm. We have received your demand. I feel I should inform you that this colony is under the protection of the Terran Colonial Navy. I strongly advise you to withdraw your forces to avoid any unnecessary bloodshed. Please, consider this carefully. Zethor's mandibles clicked together in a gesture of pure amusement. Unnecessary bloodshed? The human was talking as if he actually had a choice in the matter, as if his pathetic little defense platforms could stand up to 200 advanced warships. The human is refusing, sir, his second-in-command stated the obvious. Then we proceed as ordered, Zethor replied coolly. Target their orbital stations, demolish them, but leave the planet alone for now. Once they see their defenses crumble, they'll come to their senses. The fleet advanced in perfect, terrifying formation. It was the same dance of conquest the Croth had performed hundreds of times, a sequence so familiar it was almost boring. The human platforms fired first, launching primitive railgun slugs and missiles. The projectiles sparked harmlessly against the Croth shields. In return, the plasma cannons from 50 of Zethor's warships fired as one. The orbital stations simply vanished in silent, expanding fireballs. But something felt wrong. Commander? The sensor officer said, his voice laced with confusion. The civilian ships are evacuating the stations, but they aren't panicking. They're moving in perfect, organized patterns. There's no chaos at all. Zethor squinted at the displays. The officer was right. The human ships were pulling back with a discipline that looked like a practiced drill. Where was the fear? The desperation? They aren't fighting back, his weapons officer noted. But they aren't surrendering either, Zethor finished, pushing down a tiny flicker of doubt. Continue the bombardment. They'll break. Just then, the sensor officer shot straight up in his chair. Commander, new contact. It's coming from behind the planet's moon. A single vessel, but its size. Commander, it's enormous. It has 3 times the mass of our flagship. Zethor whipped his head toward the main view screen. A single, colossal ship was emerging. As it cleared the moon's shadow, his sensors went crazy trying to get a lock. Its hull was made of an unknown alloy. Its energy signature was off every chart they had, and it was moving with an impossible speed and grace for something so massive. That can't be a human ship, his tactical officer whispered in awe. But as it drew closer, a transmission signal cut through the static, identifying it in plain human and galactic common. T-Science, Indomitable. Terran Colonial Navy, Destroyer Class. Destroyer Class? Zethor thought. They classify a ship that massive as a destroyer? For the first time in his very long and decorated military career, Commander Zethor felt a cold, unfamiliar sensation creep up his spine. He felt doubt. The human battleship sliced through space like a predator. Its hull was a deep, non-reflective black that seemed to swallow sensor beams whole. The ship's design was all sharp, aggressive angles, bristling with weapon ports that looked far too large to be practical. "Full sensor analysis now!" Zethor commanded, fighting to keep his voice from shaking. "I want to know everything about that ship." His officer's fingers flew across the console. "Commander, our sensors can't penetrate its hull. The material is unknown. Its energy signatures, they don't match any known power source. The readings suggest an output that should be physically impossible for a vessel of its size." "Nothing is impossible," Zethor snapped, though the words sounded hollow even to him. "It's just one ship. We have 200. The comms console lit up again. A human face filled the screen. She was female, with dark hair pulled back in a severe military style. Her uniform was crisp, her expression utterly serene, as if facing down a fleet of 200 warships was just another Tuesday. "Commander Zethor," she said in flawless galactic common, "I am Captain Park of the Terran colonial navy ship Indomitable. You have, without provocation, attacked a colony under Terran protection. This is your one and only opportunity to withdraw your fleet peacefully. I suggest you take it." Zethor's anger flared, chasing away the fear. How dare she? How dare this primitive speak to him as if she held the winning hand? He had 200 warships. She had one. "Captain Park," he spat back, making sure to emphasize her inferior rank. "I am a commander of the Kroth Empire. I don't take suggestions from a species that just learned how to leave its own solar system. You are outnumbered 200 to 1. You get the same offer I gave your colony: surrender or be annihilated." Captain Park's expression didn't even flicker. There was no fear, no hesitation, only a cold, professional resolve that made Zethor's skin crawl. "I see," she said softly. "Then you have made your choice. The responsibility for what happens next is entirely yours." The transmission ended. "Arrogant human," Zethor's second-in-command muttered. "She thinks one big ship can fight our whole fleet." "All vessels," Zethor broadcast, his voice ringing with authority. "Target the human warship. Concentrate all fire on my mark. We will teach these humans what happens when they challenge the Kroth Empire." 200 warships repositioned themselves, their weapon systems glowing with power. Plasma cannons whined as they charged. Missile bays slid open. Every single gun in the fleet took aim at the lone human ship. "Mark!" Zethor roared. The space between the two forces erupted in a blinding storm of light. Plasma, lasers, and hundreds of missiles converged on the Indomitable. It was enough firepower to crack a planet's crust, enough to vaporize an entire fleet. The bombardment lasted for a full 30 seconds. When the energy finally faded and the searing light cleared, Zethor stared, expecting to see nothing but drifting wreckage. They were expecting to see shattered metal and broken bodies tumbling through the void. Instead, the human ship, the Indomitable, just hung there in space, completely untouched. 200 of the Empire's finest warships had just unleashed hell, and there wasn't a single scratch on its hull. Its shields didn't even shimmer. All that power had done absolutely nothing. If you think this is unbelievable, wait until you hear what happens next. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like and subscribe. "Impossible," someone whispered on the bridge. Zethor wasn't sure who said it. It might have been him. "Sensors," he barked. "What happened? Did we miss?" "No, Commander," the sensor officer replied, his voice trembling. "Every shot hit the target, but their shields, they just absorbed it. The energy vanished. Our weapons didn't even register." Zethor stared at the view screen, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. This couldn't be right. No shield in the galaxy could take that kind of punishment without showing some strain. Unless everything they thought they knew about humans was a lie. The communication channel crackled to life, and Captain Park's face appeared again. Her expression hadn't changed. She still looked disappointed, like a teacher watching her prize student fail the simplest of tests. "Your turn is over," she said, her voice chillingly calm. "All ships evasive maneuvers, now!" Zethor screamed, but he knew it was already over. The Indomitable fired a single weapon, just one. A railgun turret on its front glowed for a split second, and then launched a projectile so fast Zethor's eyes couldn't even track it. The tungsten slug crossed the vast distance between the two ships in less than a second. It slammed into Zethor's flagship, the mighty Crimson Fang, dead center. The shields, the very same shields that had carried them through dozens of battles, simply vanished as if they were never there. The projectile tore through the ship's armor like it was tissue paper. The massive warship shuddered violently, then split clean in two, severed down the middle by the sheer force of the impact. Zethor was thrown from his feet, slamming hard against his command chair. Emergency alarms blared. Half of his bridge crew were gone, sucked into the vacuum of space the moment the hull was breached. Shimmering force fields snapped into place, just barely keeping the air inside the command section. "Damage report!" he yelled over the chaos. "The ship is gone, Commander," his second-in-command said, his voice completely hollow. "We're only alive because the command section is armored. Life support will maybe last 2 hours." Zethor hauled himself to his feet and stared at the few displays that were still working. The entire back half of his flagship was just a piece of debris, tumbling away with dead engines. The front section, where he stood, was drifting without power. But that wasn't what sent a river of ice through his veins. The human battleship hadn't moved. It was just floating there, watching. It could have destroyed his entire fleet with that first shot if it wanted to. It had the power, the precision, and the technology, but it chose to fire only once. It was sending a message, a brutally clear one. The humans could have wiped them from existence, but they chose not to. They chose restraint. They chose to demonstrate their absolute superiority without committing a massacre. "Commander," the communications officer said weakly, "the rest of the fleet is asking for orders." Orders? What orders could he possibly give? Attack. They had all seen what happened. Their weapons were useless, and that single human ship could pick them off one by one without breaking a sweat. Retreat? That would be admitting defeat. Admitting that the great Croc Empire, conquerors of 47 star systems, had been utterly humiliated by a single vessel from a species they considered primitive. Zethor looked at the terrified faces of his remaining bridge crew. These were young, proud officers who had been raised to believe in Croc superiority, who thought galactic conquest was their birthright. Now, all he saw in their eyes was fear and utter confusion. "All ships," he said slowly, each word feeling like poison in his mouth. "Cease fire. Do not engage the human vessel. Put them on the main screen." The Indomitable remained perfectly still, like a massive predator observing its wounded prey, just waiting to see what it would do next. Waiting to see if the Croc would finally learn their lesson, or if they needed more convincing. In that moment, Zethor understood a terrible truth. The humans hadn't just stumbled into galactic space. They had been watching, learning, preparing. And when they finally decided to show their hand, they did so with technology so far beyond the Croc, it made his people look like children playing with toys. The hunters had become the hunted, and they hadn't even seen it coming until it was far too late. Panic began to ripple through the Croc fleet like a wildfire. Zethor could hear the fear cracking the voices on the comms. His captains, hardened veterans of countless campaigns, now sounded like scared kids. "Commander, what are your orders?" one captain pleaded, his voice high and strained. "Do we engage?" another demanded. "Can we retreat?" a third begged. Zethor had no answers to give. His flagship was in pieces, his crew was dead or dying, and the human ship just waited with terrifying patience, like a teacher giving his students time to reflect on their mistakes. Then, some of his captains made their own choice. 5 ships broke formation and ran, their engines flaring at maximum power as they tried to reach the system's edge and jump to light speed. "Fools," Zethor muttered to himself. Did they honestly believe they could outrun that monster? But the Indomitable didn't even bother to pursue them. It stayed right where it was, its weapons silent. Captain Park was letting them go. But why? The answer hit Zethor like a punch to the gut. She was letting them escape so they could tell everyone what happened here today. The humans wanted witnesses. They wanted the story to spread. Other captains, driven by pride or maybe just stupidity, chose the opposite route. 30 warships surged forward, accelerating toward the human battleship with all weapons blazing. Plasma, energy beams, and missiles lit up the space between them in a storm of deadly light. The Indomitable finally began to move. It didn't dodge or weave. It simply glided forward, its shields absorbing every single hit without any effort at all. Then, its own weapons answered, but not with the massive railgun that had torn Zethor's flagship apart. This time, it used its smaller weapons, point defense systems that tracked each attacking ship with chilling precision. Laser batteries fired in rapid bursts, each shot perfectly calculated to disable, not destroy. The first Croc warship lost its engines in a shower of sparks. The second had its weapon arrays melted into useless slag. The third began to spin uncontrollably as its maneuvering thrusters were blown off. One by one, the attacking ships were crippled with surgical accuracy. In less than 3 minutes, 30 warships were left drifting helplessly in space. Not a single one was destroyed. Every crew was still alive, but they were completely powerless, floating like broken toys. "By the ancestors," Zethor's second officer whispered in disbelief. "They aren't even trying." That was the most horrifying part of it all. The human ship moved with a casual grace, like it was just swatting away a few annoying flies. There was no rush, no sign of struggle, no indication that this battle required any real effort from them at all. Zethor forced himself to think past the pain and the shock. He went over everything he knew about humans, their clumsy fusion drives, their primitive weapons, their complete lack of shield technology. All of the intelligence report, they were all wrong. But how? The Croc had one of the best intelligence agencies in the galaxy. They had watched human space for months before launching their attack. They had analyzed their ships down to the last bolt. How could they have missed this? And then the answer came to him. And it was so much worse than anything he could have imagined. The humans had let them see exactly what they wanted the Croc to see. The primitive ships, the basic tech, the weak defenses, it was all a performance, a test. The humans had been watching the Croc just as closely as the Croc had been watching them, and when the Empire revealed its true aggressive nature by attacking a defenseless colony, the humans revealed their true strength. "They were waiting for us," Zethor said, the words barely a whisper. "They knew we would attack." "What do you mean, Commander?" his second officer asked. "The humans," Zethor explained, his voice grim. "They've been out here longer than we ever knew, much longer. They watched us conquer other species. They studied our tactics, our weapons, our very nature. They knew we would see them as weak. They knew we would attack, and they prepared for this exact moment." It was a horrible, perfect kind of sense. The humans hadn't just entered the galactic stage because they finally invented faster-than-light travel. They entered it because they chose to. They had built their military not to fight the current powers of the galaxy, but to fight any threat that might ever exist. They had prepared for dangers that hadn't even been born yet. And in doing so, they had become more powerful than anything that did exist. The communication console activated one last time. Captain Park's face appeared, and this time, Zethor truly saw her. She was young for a captain, probably no more than 40 of his cycles old, but her eyes held the kind of weight that only comes from seeing real war. Not the easy conquests the Croc were used to, but brutal, hard-fought battles. "Commander Zethor," she said, her tone level and firm, "I'm going to explain something to you. Please listen very carefully, because your life and the lives of your remaining crews depend on you understanding what I am about to say." Zethor remained silent. What was there to say? "The Indomitable," she continued, "is a destroyer-class vessel." Captain Park's voice was steady. "This ship," she explained, "is just one of 12 like it patrolling this little corner of space. Across the entire Terran colonial navy, we have 400 of these vessels in active service, and that's just the beginning. Above destroyers, we have cruisers. Above them, battleships. And at the very top, the dreadnoughts. Each class is bigger and more powerful than the one before it." She let the silence hang in the air, giving the information time to land. "My ship has a crew of 800 souls. We've been on duty for 5 years. In all that time, we've never fired our main cannons at another living being. Today was the first. Do you get what that means?" Zethor got it all right. It meant humanity possessed a level of power so overwhelming, they never even had to show it until now. Until the crack had pushed them too far. "Your intelligence report said humans were primitive," Captain Park continued, her tone unreadable. "And they weren't wrong. 20 years ago, that's exactly where we were. But we humans learn fast, we adapt, we get better, and most importantly, we prepare for the worst. She paused again. Through the main view screen, Zethor saw more of his warships drifting silently past, their engines cold and their weapons dead. Humanity spent 5 centuries at war with itself, Captain Park said. We turned conflict into an art form on our home world. We created weapons that could wipe out all life on our planet, and we nearly did it 3 separate times. Eventually, we learned a hard lesson. Strength without wisdom is just a quick way to kill yourself. Power without control leads to extinction. She leaned in just a little, and her eyes were like steel. When we finally reached for the stars, we found species like yours, conquerors, empires built on the backs of others. We watched you crush the Velians, the Taurans, the Hikari. We argued about whether to introduce ourselves or just stay in the shadows. And then you attacked New Edinburgh. Zethor's voice was barely a whisper. I know what you wanted, Captain Park cut him off. That's why we let you come all the way here. That's why we didn't just vaporize your fleet the second you entered this system. We needed to send a message, Commander, not just to you, but to every empire in this galaxy that thinks might makes right. Zethor looked at the wreckage of his bridge, at the faces of his fallen crew, at the ruin of his flagship. Message received, he said, the words tasting like ash. Good, Captain Park replied. Now, here's what happens next. We're going to rescue your surviving crew members. We'll give medical care to your wounded. We'll get the life support back online on your ships. Then, you are going to fly back to your empire and tell them exactly what happened here today. They'll want revenge, Zethor warned. The empire will send a bigger fleet. Captain Park's expression was unshakable. Then we will send more messages, as many as it takes for the lesson to stick. This is what mercy looks like, Commander Zethor. Remember this moment, because you will not get it a second time. Within the hour, the human rescue operation was in full swing. From the crippled command deck of his flagship, Zethor watched as smaller ships zipped out of the massive vessel, the TCS Indomitable. They were sleek, fast, and moved with the same unnerving confidence as the warship they came from. Commander, his communications officer reported, the humans are on the line. They're offering medical help. Accept, Zethor ordered. What choice did he have? The air on his bridge was growing thin, and his wounded crew wouldn't last much longer. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. A human shuttle soon docked with their command section. The airlock hissed open, and 3 figures in protective suits stepped aboard. They moved with caution, scanning for threats and checking the atmosphere. When they took off their helmets, Zethor was surprised to see they were young, barely considered adults by crack standards. Commander Zethor? One of them asked, pointing to the medical insignia on his suit. Why? Zethor asked, his voice raw. Why are you helping us? We attacked you. The medic, whose name tag read Chen, gave him a look that Zethor couldn't quite figure out. It was a mix of pity and maybe sadness. Because leaving you here to die would make us no better than you are. Now come on, let's get your people to safety. The humans worked with a chilling efficiency. They deployed portable life support generators, treated the injured with medicines that worked faster than anything in the crack arsenal, and patched up critical systems on the broken ships. There was no boasting, no mocking. They were just professionals, focused on the job. 2 hours later, Zethor was standing aboard the TCS Indomitable itself, walking through hallways that made his own flagship feel like a relic from a forgotten age. Everything was spotless, organized, and pulsed with a quiet, immense power. Human crew members walked past him without a second look, as if having an enemy commander on their bridge was just another Tuesday. He was led into a briefing room where Captain Park was waiting. She sat at a large conference table with a holographic map floating over it. She motioned to a chair across from her. Please, have a seat, she said. Can I get you some water? Our biological database says your species can drink it. Zethor sank into the chair, his entire body aching. A crewman brought him a container of water. He took a sip, expecting a strange taste, but it was just water, clean and cool. You have a biological database on us, he stated. How long have you been watching the crack? For 3 years, Captain Park answered directly. We flagged your empire as a potential threat not long after we arrived in this region of space. We studied your patterns of conquest, your technology, your culture. We learned your language. We know your history. Then you knew we would attack. Yes, she said simply. The Crack Empire has never met a species it perceived as weaker without trying to conquer it. You are predictable in that regard. The words stung, mostly because they were absolutely true. Zethor had lived his whole life believing the Crack were superior, that their endless conquests were a right earned by their strength. Now, sitting on an enemy warship, saved by the very people he'd tried to annihilate, he was starting to see just how small and foolish his worldview had been. Captain Park tapped the holographic display, and images shimmered into existence between them. Zethor recognized the planet. Earth, she said, the human homeworld. Let me tell you a story about us. Our planet is a rough place, higher gravity than most life-bearing worlds, violent weather, and predators that would give you nightmares. Our entire evolution was one long, brutal fight for survival. We got smart not because we were the strongest, but because we had to be, just to avoid being wiped out. The images flickered, showing scenes from human history, brutal wars, devastating weapons, and widespread destruction. We spent 5,000 years fighting ourselves, she went on. We built empires just to watch them crumble to dust. We kept inventing more and more horrible ways to kill each other. Chemical weapons, biological plagues, nuclear bombs. 3 times in our history, we came within a few days of making ourselves extinct. Zethor stared as holographic cities were consumed by fire. He saw the terrifying mushroom clouds bloom over human settlements, knowing millions died in a flash. We learned something from nearly destroying ourselves, Captain Park said, her voice soft. We learned that strength by itself is worthless. Victory without wisdom is just a defeat you haven't realized yet. We almost died because we couldn't control our own power. The images changed again, this time showing human spaceships. First came the primitive rockets, then better models, then the fusion-powered ships his intelligence officers had reported. And then came newer ships, sleeker, more advanced than anything he had ever seen. When we finally developed faster-than-light travel, we spent 10 years just debating if we should even reveal ourselves to the galaxy, Captain Park explained. We sent out probes first, to watch and listen. We learned about the other species out here, the peaceful ones, the aggressive ones, and empires like yours. You were afraid, Zethor realized. We were cautious, she corrected. There's a world of difference. We built our entire military for the worst-case scenario. We kept asking ourselves, what if we meet someone with technology far beyond ours? What if we run into something so hostile we can't possibly win? How do we survive that? She gestured to the ship around them. This is the answer. We decided to build overwhelming power, but to pair it with absolute restraint. Every single human warship is designed to fight an enemy that doesn't even exist yet. Our weapons can crack planets open. Our shields can take a blast from a star. Our ships can go faster and farther than anything else we've ever encountered. Zethor felt a wave of nausea. The Crack had thought they were the titans of the galaxy. They thought their conquests made them strong. But they had just been lucky. Lucky they'd never stumbled across a species like humanity, and luckier still that these humans chose to hold back. So why show yourselves now? He asked. Why not just stay hidden forever? Because hiding isn't living, Captain Park said. And because we saw what your empire does to those who can't fight back. The Velians, the Taurans, species that didn't stand a chance. We debated stepping in, but ultimately decided it wasn't our job to police the galaxy. She looked him right in the eye. Then you attacked New Edinburgh, a civilian colony full of families and children. You gave us a 1-hour ultimatum for total surrender, and then you started blowing up our orbital stations without any real provocation. You forced our hand. We thought you were weak, Zethor admitted quietly. We know, that was the point, but weakness is not an invitation for conquest. And vulnerability is not permission for violence. These are lessons my people learned through unimaginable pain. And now, it seems we have to teach them to others. Captain Park stood up and walked over to the viewport. Outside, the silent, crippled shapes of the crack fleet drifted among the stars. "I'm going to tell you something that's not classified," she said. "The TCS Indomitable is 5 years old. In that time, we've traveled to 20 different star systems. We've met 4 other species that could have been hostile. None of them attacked us, because a simple show of our strength was enough to convince them that a fight would be pointless. Today is the first time in 5 years that I have ever had to fire my main weapons at another living soul." She turned back to face him, her expression a mask of grim resolve. "Do you get what that means? Humanity has forged the single most powerful military in this corner of the galaxy, and its main purpose is to never get into a fight. We win by making sure a battle never has to happen. That's what real power is." Zethor's mind raced through his own career. 47 conquered star systems, hundreds of battles, and thousands of lives extinguished. He always saw himself as strong, but he'd only ever picked fights with those weaker than him. "So what happens now?" he finally asked. Captain Park settled back into her command chair. "Now, you go back to your empire," she said calmly. "You tell them what you saw here. You make them understand that humanity isn't weak or primitive or some easy target for your next conquest. You tell them we're offering peace and partnership to anyone who comes to us with respect. But if they refuse to listen," and here Captain Park's face turned to ice, "if they send another fleet, we will tear it apart. And the one after that, and the one after that. Sooner or later, the Croc Empire will learn that attacking humanity is a death sentence. The only question is, how many of your own people have to be sacrificed before you finally get the message?" It took 3 long months for Zethor to stand before the High Council of the Croth Empire. 3 months of patching up shattered warships, of silent travel through the void, and of sleepless nights where the battle replayed in his head on a loop. 3 months of dread, knowing he had to deliver a truth that would shatter the very foundation of his civilization. The council chamber felt ancient, carved from stone brought from the Croc homeworld 1,000 years before. 12 high commanders sat on raised thrones, their expressions dripping with barely hidden scorn. Zethor stood alone in the center of the vast room, waiting for the judgment to begin. "Commander Zethor," the eldest councilman rumbled, his voice thick with disappointment. "You took command of 200 of our finest warships to pacify a primitive human colony. You came back with 137 crippled ships, 63 completely lost, and over 4,000 of our soldiers dead. Explain this catastrophe." Zethor had rehearsed this moment 100 times. He had practiced his speech, chosen his words with care, but now, facing them, he knew that words alone wouldn't cut it. "Honored Council," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his soul. "I must report that our intelligence on human capabilities was not just wrong, it was catastrophically, fundamentally flawed. The humans are not primitive. They are not weak. They are, without a doubt, the most technologically superior species we have ever met." A heavy silence fell over the chamber, broken only when a younger council member let out a short, mocking laugh. "Superior? They barely figured out faster than light travel a year ago." "No," Zethor said, his voice ringing with conviction. "They let us believe they figured it out a year ago. The truth is, humanity has had this level of technology for decades. They've been watching us, studying us, learning our strategies and our weaknesses. When we attacked New Edinburgh, we weren't invading a colony. We were walking straight into a classroom, and they were the teachers." He gestured, and a holographic display flared to life, showing scenes from the battle. The Croc Armada unleashing its full power on the ship called the Indomitable. The footage showed their weapons splashing uselessly against its shields. Then, the display showed the single, elegant beam of light that sliced his own flagship in two. "A single human destroyer-class ship defeated our entire fleet and didn't even get a scratch on its paint," Zethor stated. "Their shields are impenetrable. Their armor is beyond anything we can forge. Their power output is 10 times higher than our most wildly optimistic projections." "Then why didn't they wipe you out?" another councilman shot back. "If they're so mighty, why would they show you mercy?" "That," Zethor said softly, "is the most critical part of my report. They showed mercy because they needed us to survive. They needed us to come home and deliver their message. He made a point to look each council member directly in the eye. Humanity does not want a war. They could have erased us from existence in that system. Instead, they surgically disabled our ships, rescued our surviving crews, gave them medical attention, and then sent us on our way. Captain Park of the Indomitable told me herself that humanity's strength is used primarily to prevent conflict. They win by proving a fight would be utterly pointless. The eldest council member leaned forward, his gaze intense and calculating. Are you suggesting we've met a civilization more powerful than our own? A civilization that chooses restraint over domination? Yes, honored elder, and I'm suggesting we should learn from their example. The Croc Empire has been built on one single idea. Might makes right. The strong take what they want from the weak, but humanity is showing us another way. They are stronger than us by every measure, and yet they have no desire to rule us. Weakness, one of the other counselors spat. They're soft, too scared to use the power they have. No, Zethor countered, surprised at the fire in his own voice. Not weakness, wisdom. Humanity told me they almost annihilated themselves 3 different times with their own weapons. They learned the hard way that power without control is just suicide. They built their military to be impossibly strong for the specific purpose of never, ever having to use it in anger. He took a breath, letting the idea sink in. All my life, I believed that conquest was the ultimate proof of superiority. But as I sat in the ruins of my command bridge, being rescued by the very enemy I had come to crush, I understood something profound. True strength isn't the power to conquer. It's the wisdom to show mercy when you hold all the cards. Humanity beat us by choosing not to destroy us. The chamber was utterly silent. Zethor could practically see the gears turning in their heads, fighting against a lifetime of doctrine. The Krothic Empire had thrived for 300 years on a single, brutal principle. He was now telling them that principle was a lie. Finally, the eldest councilman spoke. What is it you want us to do, Commander? Surrender? Bend the knee to these humans? I want us to open a dialogue, Zethor replied immediately. Humanity offers peace to those who approach them with respect. They have technology we can only dream of, knowledge we desperately need. They can help us become something greater than we are. And what if the Council chooses to send a larger fleet to avenge this insult? A cold dread filled Zethor's gut. He prayed it wouldn't come to this. Then that fleet will also be destroyed, he said, his voice flat and absolute. Captain Park made that crystal clear. Humanity will defend itself. They have 400 ships just like the Indomitable, not to mention even larger, more powerful classes. If we send 1,000 warships, they will disable or destroy every last one. And they'll do it while taking almost no casualties, because they are simply that far ahead of us. You sound as if you admire them, another council member noted, his tone laced with suspicion. I do, Zethor admitted without hesitation. They are everything we pretended to be, powerful, brilliant, advanced. But unlike us, they balance their strength with wisdom. They could rule this entire sector of the galaxy by force. Instead, they're offering to cooperate. The council argued for hours. Zethor stood his ground, answering every question, showing his evidence, and explaining over and over that this was not an enemy they could simply overwhelm with brute force. Finally, the eldest council member rose to his feet. The council has reached a decision. We will dispatch diplomatic envoys to the humans. We will sue for peace. But understand this, Commander Zethor, he continued, his voice like grinding stone. You have asked us to abandon the very principles our empire was founded on. If you are wrong about these humans, if this is all some grand trick, the price for your failure will be steep. I understand, honored elder, but I'm not wrong. I saw their power with my own eyes. I was a recipient of their mercy, and I know the choice we face is a simple one. We either adapt or we get left behind in a galaxy that's evolving beyond simple conquest. 2 months later, Croc diplomatic ships cautiously entered the orbit of Earth, the human homeworld. They were met with formal courtesy. negotiations for peace and a technology-sharing treaty began. Zethor, no longer a commander but an advisor to the diplomatic corps, stood on an observation deck, gazing down at the swirling blue and white marble below. It was a stunningly beautiful world, and he could see how such a harsh planet could forge such an incredible species. A human diplomat, Ambassador Martinez, joined him at the window. "Commander Zethor," she said, using his old title as a courtesy, "I wanted to thank you. Captain Park told us what happened at New Edinburgh. She said you chose wisdom over pride." "I didn't have much of a choice," Zethor replied with a wry smile. "Pride becomes a very expensive luxury when you're facing an opponent who can vaporize you without breaking a sweat." "True," she conceded, "but many in your position would have chosen pride anyway. It's why we study our own history so carefully. Every empire built on conquest eventually falls. They either rot from the inside or run into someone stronger," she continued. "We decided we wanted to break that cycle." "So you built a power so overwhelming," Zethor mused, "that you'd never have to use it." "Exactly. It's much easier to keep the peace when everyone understands that a war would be catastrophic for them and pointless for us. We call it peace through strength, tempered with wisdom. Strength by itself just leads to bigger guns and an inevitable war." Zethor thought of his own empire, of the 47 systems crushed under its boot, of all the species living in fear. He thought of how much effort went into simply holding it all together by force. "I think," he said slowly, "that the Croc have a great deal to learn from humanity, not just about technology, but about purpose. We've been so obsessed with conquering that we never stop to ask why we were conquering in the first place." Ambassador Martinez smiled warmly. "That's a very good start, admitting there might be a better way. Who knows? Maybe in a few generations, the Krothic Empire won't be famous for the systems it conquered, but for the things it helped build." "Perhaps," Zethor said, a genuine hope sparking within him. Outside the station, human patrol ships glided by like silent sentinels. They were destroyer class, just like the Indomitable, protectors of a peace guaranteed by unimaginable power held in reserve. Zethor remembered that terrifying moment 3 months ago, staring in horror as his flagship was torn apart. He once saw that ship as a monster. Now he understood it was a lifeline. In that single moment, he witnessed the galaxy's true destiny. It wasn't a future ruled by the iron fist of the strongest military, but one where strength was used to protect the peace, not to conquer it. The Kroth had seen a human warship and understood with chilling certainty that their own path led only to their annihilation. But they saw something else in that terrifying vision too, a chance to be more, an invitation to join a galactic family built on partnership, not power. It was never going to be easy. Old hatreds have deep roots. There were still factions within the Empire screaming for payback, for one final glorious battle to prove Kroth supremacy. But those voices were getting softer every day, drowned out by the undeniable truth of humanity's power. Zethor pressed a hand to the cold viewport, gazing down at the earth below. What a harsh cradle, he thought, one that had created an equally tough people. Yet, all that hardship had taught them the meaning of mercy. Their history of struggle had shown them the necessity of working together. And having stared into the abyss of their own extinction, they learned that real strength isn't found in the power to destroy, but in the will to protect. "We saw their capital ship," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "and right then we understood. The war was already over. We had already lost. They simply made the choice to let us exist. That one choice changed the course of history."